tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
We've seen in the last several days and weeks, and to be honest, months, a mounting of anti-Semitism, of incidents of anti-Semitism on city council and politicians' offices and Jewish community centers and schools. And what's happening throughout all of these instances is we've seen the Liberal government in particular be very equivocal on its position. You may remember it was very slow to start talking about a lot of the horrific atrocities that Hamas committed. When it came to protesters calling for a ceasefire, the government didn't say, well, we support Israel's right to defend itself. Justin Trudeau turned around to protesters and says, oh, no, but I am calling for a ceasefire, basically saying, yes, I agree with you, stop protesting. Well, one of the things that is really interesting here is that the government, when it learned that UNRWA, which is the UN refugee agency for the Palestinian territories, had been turning a blind eye to members of its own staff, literally its own staff, assisting Hamas and joining the Hamas attack, they said, all right, we're going to announce a pause, but now they've reinstated it before the next payment was due. So the federal government in Canada has basically not deprived UNRWA of a dollar by my count. Brian Lee Crowley is here. He is from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and we're so glad to talk to him as always. Brian, thanks so much for coming on today.
Andrew, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And just before we get underway, I want everybody to see my mug with the Queen's profile on it in the context of your last conversation.
Yeah, Chris said she's a quasi-monarchist. You're not doing the quasi on your part, are you?
I'm the real thing.
All right, duly noted. This was purely window dressing when the government said it was going to pause this funding, and the fact that they've reinstated it just weeks later tells us as much, doesn't it?
Well, it does, Andrew, and let's be even clearer about this. What Canada and most other countries have done is who've taken action on this. They've suspended additional funding. They have not cut the basic funding, which is about 1.1 or 1.2 billion dollars. That's the base budget for UNRWA, paid for mostly by Western democracies. I think the United States pays about literally 3/4 of the budget of UNRWA. But there's now, because of the conflict, obviously, that's going on between Israel and Hamas, carried out on the territory of Gaza, the people are putting extra money into UNRWA, and it's that extra money which a number of countries promised to suspend while an investigation was carried out about whether we could find credible evidence to support the allegation that there are staff members of UNRWA, as well as family members, associates, and other people close to UNRWA, very much involved in not only the armed conflict since the 7th of October, but in the heinous attacks on Israel on the 7th of October. People, staff members who have actually boasted online and elsewhere about their involvement in this. So, Canada has, first of all, said, okay, we're going to suspend extra payment, not the basic payment, the extra payment.
No, that's fair.
And we're going to suspend it until we have an investigation that tells us whether these allegations are founded. They've now reversed themselves completely. Basically, they've said, oh, well, it doesn't. We're not going to wait for the results of the investigation. We may be funding an organization that aids and abets terrorism, but hey, we got to get that funding in there. And the idea that there is no other way for Canada to provide humanitarian relief to the people of Gaza except through UNRWA is complete nonsense. So I'm not very impressed.
Well, nor should you be. And I should point out, UNRWA itself has even conceded that this allegation was accurate. Now, they've done the whole Casablanca thing of like, we're shocked to find gambling in here, but they've not refuted it at this point. And I want to play and get your reaction to this, Brian. This is a clip from an Israeli official responding to Canada's decision this week. Let's roll that.
A similar question. Canada announced on Friday that funding to UNRWA will be resumed after being paused. Does the PMO have comment on that? And why should Canadian taxpayers and what should they know about the links between UNRWA and Hamas?
So I think what the taxpayers should know is that their money is funding terror. As simple as that. And do they want their money to help terrorists build tunnels, educate children how to kill and that they should kill, and train them how to do so? Is that the best way for the taxpayers' money to be used? We think that there are much better ways. If we want Gaza to have the bright future that it can't, you can't keep on giving the money to an organization that taught hate, facilitated, and was part of a massacre. And it's not just a few. We have evidence of a lot of people, and there's no way that the people who are running this organization did not know this. So that means that there has to be another solution, and the taxpayers' money should be for a better and future for Gaza, which does not include UNRWA in any way.
She is not talking about Iran or Lebanon or Saudi Arabia or Qatar when she's talking about funding terror. She is talking about Canada. And that was a question that was asked by our friends over at the News Forum. Quite a far cry from the relationship Canada had with Israel up until, well, basically up until the Liberals took over.
You're absolutely right that the historic relationship that Canada has had with Israel has been a very supportive one. Canada was one of the countries that voted for the creation of Israel in 1948 at the United Nations, in case people have forgotten that the creation of the state of Israel was mandated by the United Nations and carried out by a majority vote of the member states. So the next time somebody tells you that Israel is an illegitimate state, they've got several birth certificates, of which the UN issued one.
I think it was the only pro-Israel vote that ever passed at the UN, to be honest, but it was the important one.
Well, it's the one that matters, I think. Yeah. Canada has been a strong supporter of Israel over many years. And I have to say that I think this decision by the government of Canada to restore the extra funding to UNRWA is entirely in keeping with the behavior of this government over pretty much every foreign policy, national security, national defense issue, which is they're playing to a domestic audience. This is diaspora politics. They're looking to and seeing, tens of thousands of Palestinian and Hamas supporters in the streets and cities of Canada, and looking at the fact that there's now 1 million Muslims in Canada, more, and saying to themselves, there's an electoral calculation here we don't want to be on the wrong side of. And I think that's a shocking and shameful way to conduct the foreign policy of this country.
I would agree. I mean, obviously, politicians, I think, should be beholden to, everything they do should be to serve Canada and Canada's interests. And I think that domestic policy is actually very relevant to foreign policy. But I also believe that fundamental questions of right and wrong are, and those are not majoritarian decisions. And we're talking here about a very clear-cut case about terrorist aggressors assaulting civilians. And we've seen equivocation. And the Liberals, I mean, it used to be historically that the Jewish vote, insofar as it existed, and it was never monolithic, it isn't with any group, but that a lot of the Jewish vote went to the Liberals. And when did that change happen? Because there are a lot of Liberals or lifelong Liberals who are Jewish that I've heard from that don't really have much in the way of high expectations from the Liberals now, but a couple of years ago did. And a couple of years ago kind of would never have expected what's happening now from this party that they've been part of for, in some cases, decades.
Yes, well, I mean, of course, I can't speak to what's going through the mind of members of the Canadian Jewish community. I can tell you what's going through my mind, which is that if I were Jewish and I were looking at the equivocation of the government of Canada, their complete unwillingness to be crystal clear about the fact that Canada as a Western democracy supports the only Western democracy in the Middle East, which is Israel, one that is under the rule of law, that makes its decisions by democratic means, that is entirely legitimate under international law, and is being attacked by people who do not share those values. If I were a Jewish Canadian, I were looking at the government of Canada fumbling the ball over and over again when being asked to confirm that they are going to support Israel and the values that Israel represents in the Middle East. And the government of Canada says, well, Maybe until someone makes me uncomfortable politically, and then maybe not. This is completely at odds with the historical behavior of the government of Canada, and with, I believe, the values that the government of Canada and Canadians have pursued for generations.
So where do you see it going from here? I mean, the situation domestically has gotten very ugly. I mean, we've just abandoned any pretense that this is about Israel or Zionism when you have Jewish schools and neighborhoods being targeted. We have police that have been, I think, very, very shy about getting involved. And a part of this is because they don't want to be in the middle of some, ethnic turmoil. Basically, or some, cultural spat, and police in general don't want to be the ones in the line of fire when government comes and second guesses whatever decision was made. So where do you see this going? Because I fear, and every Jewish person I've talked to about this says it's going to get a heck of a lot worse.
Yeah, well, I think you really touched on something very important there, Andrew, and that is that I think one of the reasons, not the only reason, I think one of the reasons that police have been so ineffectual, in my view, in protecting the Jewish community in Canada and asserting the right of all Canadians to carry out their ordinary lives free from fear and intimidation. That is what the police are for. That the police have learned that if they do not follow the line that the government wants them to follow, that the government will not be there to support them. And that means that they are quite reluctant, I think, to get into the dirty business, and it will be unpleasant. There is no way to deal with tens of thousands of people in the street shouting hateful slogans, intimidating citizens. This is completely different than the hot tubs of the Freedom Call, I got to tell you, completely different. And many laws are being broken. The laws that police traditionally use to police unruly demonstrations, they're not being pursued. The police are hanging back, and I think one of the main reasons is that they do not think they will be supported by public authorities if they exercise their legitimate authority in these situations. And the people who are paying the price are, of course, the vulnerable members of our Jewish community, who feel completely unprotected and unsupported by the rest of the country. And I don't know how we can do something about this in the absence of public authorities who are willing to take responsibility for what's going on. And I just don't see that right now.
No, you're quite right, Brian. I mean, it's an absolute tinderbox, and I think it's incredibly dangerous and disheartening, and I'm glad people like you are lending your voice to speaking up against it. Brian Lee Crowley, Macdonald-Laurier Institute, I feel you frozen or are deep in thought, so fitting that we have to bring it to an end here, but thank you so much for coming on, sir.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.